Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to viewers who are tuning in to the Mindset Spot. Today, we're going to be having a conversation on issues that are discussed around the world on climate change and the happenstances we find ourselves in today, which include energy crises that are inflicting pain on millions of people, especially in the African continent today, where we have over 900 million African citizens depending on clean energy. And these not only affect them and increase their poverty lines, but at the same time inflict their health. Because 700,000 Africans lose their life each and every year because of indoor pollution. But there is a discussion at the moment, not only happening in Africa, but happening across the world. And it's in two words, just transition. Today, we're going to have a conversation on exactly what just transition means for Africa and what you and me needs to do to be able to be part of the narrative, but at the same time also part of the actions that are supposed to be taken. And joining me for this debate is Mr. Robert Mungiri. Mr. Robert Mungiri, welcome to the show, man. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, sir. I'm doing great, and it's great to be back to the Mindset
Excellent.
Sport Show. Yes.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, it's great to have you. It's great to have you again. And today we are going to diagnose, to deconstruct and reconstruct the discussion around just transition in Africa. We've heard about this just transition, and this is not just something that is going to be a one-off discussion, but it is a discussion that is going to take a very long time. But I would like to hear from you. What should Africa do to seize the moment, especially within this discussion of just transition?
Yes, once more, thank you very much, sir, for having me. I think it all starts with the narrative of just transition. Globally, the narrative has been driven down the path of energy, and that is understandable because actual energy is the biggest source of emissions globally at 73%. But for
Right.
Africa, it goes beyond that. For Africa, it should be about justice, it should be about equity, it should be about creating opportunities for all as we transition our economies towards the basis that does not harm the environment as we develop. So I think that should start with narrative. That's where you should start.
I think that's a very important point that you're bringing up. And it's a point that is not necessarily always talked about narrative, because there is profound power in a narrative. And here
Yeah.
we are at the mindset spot. And the mindset spot is actually reshaping these narratives because there is profound power in a narrative, and narrative reshape perspectives. So, with a just transition within the context of the changing climate, what you are saying is it's not supposed to be about energy transition alone. It's supposed to be about a transition where there is equitable distribution of wealth, where there is justice. And justice in this case means nobody should go to bed hungry. Because we're speaking, there are 257 million Africans who go to bed hungry. Nobody should be energy insecure. Because as we're speaking, there are 620 million Africans who are energy impoverished. And when you look at this, as you rightly said, the narrative is not palatable. Which kind of narrative should Africa foster around this?
Yes, thank you very much. The narrative should center around one word: socioeconomics. How are we creating
Did you
socioeconomic
hear that? For
opportunities?
those who are watching, did you hear that? Narrative should center around one word, socioeconomics. Yes, Bob, continue.
Yes, sure. Yes, sir. Yeah. So how do we create economic opportunities for everybody as we transition or as we progress towards economies that develop without harming the environment, or that development occurs without not at the expense of the environment, basically. So that really should be where it all starts. And for this, it brings about many issues. It brings about the issue of which sectors then should be the focus. It brings about the issue of how do we prepare ourselves as the citizens of the continent to be the drivers of this narrative of socioeconomics around transitioning economies. And all this also brings in the issue of education revolution and all these things. So a lot of things surround this one word of the narrative just transition being around socioeconomics. So I think
This is
yes,
really, really great. I
yes,
think
sure.
you're touching very important aspects. And then I'll still go back to the narrative, because what I am picking from what you are saying is that there is some sense of a false narrative around transformational climate action, which means if you don't get the narrative right, you cannot get the actions right. That means we need to then perfect the narrative so that at least it should be about reality on the ground. But because I was speaking today, there is that understanding of just transition to be energy transition. And so it means the bigger chunk of what needs to be focused on is missed at. As you rightly said, Africa is actually a net sink when it comes to emissions because it only emits about 2 to 4%. But whereas globally, most of the emissions come from energy system contributing above 73%. It therefore means that this just transition narrative needs to be about socioeconomic, as you rightly said. So if someone listening out there, a young person listening out there, what would you say they should actually seize as an opportunity within this debate as it's happening now?
Yes, thank you very much. The first thing, of course, is to understand the entire narrative and then find an area that you can intervene in an uncapital intensive way, And what do we say? I think a very good place that youth can get into is the clean energy, the clean cooking area. That is a very accessible area. As we speak today, about 400 to 700,000 people die every year from unclean cooking. Up to 1 to 3 million children under 5 die because of indoor pollution, ambient air pollution because of unclean cooking. What does it tell us? This tells us that there are a lot of opportunities that can be created by providing alternative, cleaner, affordable, accessible, clean cooking solutions. And this is where young people need to come in. A simple solution like recovering agricultural waste, turning it into clean cooking briquettes, for example. That is an area that means you are tapping not less than 20 billion a year industry that is now expanded in charcoal. If you go to biogas, that the other day I saw what you are doing when you went to the work that is going on in Cameroon, a very innovative approach being used where communities are working with young people, each one bring what is their strengths and coming up with a shared solution of a communal biogas a communal biodigester that is providing both energy as well as other products that enable the community to create incomes for themselves. So what I'm saying is this, that young people need to understand the narrative first and then look for areas that you can intervene that are of a low capital intensive, and clean cooking is one of those areas.
Absolutely. I mean, you've laid down in a way that only you can do. I mean, bringing in some very critical statistics. And now that takes me now to the next aspect, which we'll discuss after we come back from break. And the break this time around is going to be a dance, because we also need to celebrate culture, which is to showcase that culture can be leveraged as a tool. And if we forget it, we might also be forgetting a narrative. So we'll be right back. After we come back, we are going to discuss exactly the energy narrative for Africa, because there's profound power in the narrative, as you've said, and there are a lot of opportunities in which young people can seize. But until then, let's take a break, and when we are right back, we'll discuss that. Yes, and that was just a break where we showcase culture By the way, before we get to the topic,
Yeah.
that's part of a narrative, isn't it? So what could you say
Ab-
about that? We'll get back to the energy narrative for Africa.
yes, of course. The first thing I'll ask is what's the meaning of kati kati?
Actually, kachukati is the delicious meal that is eaten in
Eh,
Com is where I come from in the northwestern part of Cameroon. So it's actually just chicken roasted with
mhm.
a lot of palm oil put into it, and that is a
Wow.
delicacy that is actually it represents. If you want to identify somebody who is from Com, you said kata kata. It's actually
Uh-huh.
synonymous to this
Oh,
wonderful, amazing part of the country, and they eat it with fufu. So in Kenya they call it ogali.
Gali,
Um,
yes.
yes, and in Ghana they call it banku, but in Cameroon and in Com it's fufu corn, and it's softer. You know, the ogali in Kenya is a little stronger.
Yeah, it's a
So
bit
the
hard.
difference is just that the fufu is softer, but it's all made from
Mm.
corn from maize flour. Yes,
Ah,
and all
excellent.
that
So, I mean,
fufu.
ye- yes, sure. I mean, both. I'm salivating actually because actually ugali and chicken is my favorite, to be honest.
Oh, really? Wow,
Yeah.
that is good. So
Yes.
this is a very important point because if you look across the entire African continent today, the commonalities or the
Mm,
similarities are much more bigger than the differences.
absolutely.
But sometimes that is not leverage as a strength. Rather, we focus on the weaknesses, and that's as a result of a narrative. And so
Sure.
this is quite a very beautiful way to transition into the energy narrative for the African continent today. Yes, many have argued that Africa needs to tap into exploring gas, but the reality is being missed. And I know that this is a topic in which people really need to listen very carefully because yes, of course, Africa have got abundance of minerals. It's not today that minerals are known to be in the African continent. Africa have got abundance of gas. It's not today that gas is known to be buried underneath the continent. Africa have got abundant sunshine. Yes, it's not today. Wind, geothermal, hydro. So with the hype around just transition, especially when it comes to the energy perspective within the continent, there is the forceful discussion from the perspective that because Africa is developing, gas needs to be tapped. What is your take on this discussion around gas from a narrative perspective? What would you say to those who are listening out there around this narrative of Africa must explore her minerals and especially the gas this time around?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll, of course, start by asking the question, where did this narrative come from? Because,
Mhm.
but the answer to that question is immaterial because there's no need, there's no harm in borrowing what is good, definitely.
Absolutely.
But let's also put this in perspective. Less than 50% of countries across Africa have gas, and only 12 countries have substantial amounts that can be talked about. So, can we formulate a continental narrative around 12 countries? Around 50, less than 50% of the countries? Definitely not, because that will mean that those that don't have the gas are outside that narrative, or are only accommodated in the narrative, and they don't really take part as co-stakeholders. So I would say that the narrative of gas really needs to be looked at from, I think, two or three key perspectives. The first one
Right.
is inclusivity, the inclusivity that I've talked about. The second is, are there better alternatives to gas in
I
Africa?
think before you get to
And
that, Bob, because
yes,
you have
sure.
mentioned something very important, and I think before you get to these aspects which are very crucial, I just want
Yes,
those who are watching out there to understand this. You heard Robert said gas is not a universal resource across the continent.
sure.
He also said that even those with the bigger gas that have the much more gas or quality are not even up to 20 countries. So why I'm trying to emphasize on this is to show the limitations. Yes, though there is an argument that yes, not all countries are supposed to have gas. But before you get to those, there is the reality that gas adds to emissions across the
Mhm.
world and that the exploration is expensive, as you've said.
Mm,
So, how expensive is this? Before you get to what needs to be done, I just want that we tackle that part first.
sure.
How expensive is this
Yes.
vis-a-vis focusing on solar resource, hydro? Because people could also argue that to put up a hydro dam is
Mm,
expensive and it's detrimental to our biodiversity, our ecosystem, because of the destruction of the environment that comes with constructing that. So I just want that we put that in perspective here so that people understand the reason why renewable energy should be the peace plan for the 21st century, and that is the must to do so. Over.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so of course, when you talk of course, that will be relative. But let's compare it now. It is estimated that building one terminal of natural gas it takes up to 25 billion US dollars. That is the same amount that it will take for the continent to invest each year to secure clean, affordable, and accessible energy for all in the next decade. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about comparing using about 250 billion in 10 years to provide clean, accessible energy for all across Africa, vis-a-vis spending 25 billion for just one terminal in one country. Let's say one time. So if you talk about let's say 20 countries that may have that, you're talking about nearly 500 billion for natural gas, vis-a-vis 250 billion for clean, accessible energy that covers the entire continent. The second thing is that the gas that we're talking about here will mostly be used as the conversion goes on in electricity. So it will be used to power gas plants that fit into the grid.
Right.
Now, electrifying through the grid amongst those who are most disenfranchised in Africa, which are the rural areas where 84% don't have power, costs up to 4.6 times more to electrify a rural area through the grid, vis-a-vis extending the same grid to an urban area. So what we are saying here is this, that those who are most disenfranchised or most deprived of electricity in Africa cannot be efficiently electrified through the main grid. And the main grid is where the natural gas comes in now to power, the gas plants that can feed into the grid. The other side of energy, of course, is the cooking side. Natural gas can also be used for other uses apart from industrial and energy. It's also domestic. Now, we are talking about as a resource that is available in a few countries, vis-a-vis an alternative of, let's say, biogas or fuel briquettes that can be made as simply as outside somebody's compound. So which of these two will be cost effective for the continent? Definitely more accessible, cleaner, biogas and briquettes will be far much better than talking about now natural gas, where we don't even have the terminals yet, and there are no clear models of financing it for the continent. It's just a narrative that has come up because of the ongoing, global emergencies, where we are seeing that, as countries are playing this game amongst themselves, some are saying that they are going to stop buying gas from others, and so that is where the conversation is coming from. And Africa is somehow into it. But let's look at it more objectively and more from how we can benefit from it and which alternatives the continent can take to really achieve what it really needs to achieve, which is bridging energy gap amongst the most deprived.
No, thank you very much for laying it down and cracking it down for everyone's understanding. And I think so. From what you are saying, yes, it means there are a lot of underlying gaps that are not touched, and therefore the narrative has been grabbed without contextualizing it to reality. 84% of Africans are in rural areas without access to electricity, and grid electricity cannot reach them. That's one. Yes. The amount of money that is needed to build just one liquid gas plant is 25 billion US dollars. And yes, the reality is that these issues are not discussed. But the unfortunate thing is not just about building that, is that even when you build that and get the gas, it will still be used to generate electricity that will fit into the grid, which then still have that disconnect between those in rural areas that are supposed to be able to get electricity, which can only come through mini grid or off grid, which is clean energy, solar power, electricity, that is not necessarily being discussed. So when they say that Africa's development needs to take precedence and that Africa can only develop through exploration of gas, in few words, what's your message to those who say that?
My message will be simple. Look at the numbers. That's as simple as that.
I like
the
that.
Second thing is, yes.
Before you continue, look at the numbers. I love that.
Exactly.
Continue more.
Yes. The second is development for who, really? Because if it is development for those who really need it, the 84% who are energy deprived cannot be cost effectively reached through gas. Yes. The third thing is, what are the alternatives that you have on the table before you go to the gas route?
Mm-hmm.
The fourth is they are what they call, I read somewhere where they're saying that if Africa goes down the gas route, it will lose its current, let's say, its current bargaining chip, where it is the least, the least emitter. It will
Right.
introduce what they're calling carbon bombs, where basically what this means is that if the entire continent goes down the gas route, the level of emissions will rise to unsafe levels where the 1.5 threshold that has been set through the Paris Agreement will be breached. And so if you look at it both socioeconomically as well as environmentally, the argument would weigh against going the gas route. But definitely it's just an advice, but doesn't really mean that we are
Yeah,
against it.
well, let me
Yes.
just come in here. I think what you are saying is that's a lot of new knowledge you are bringing out there. But there are also some studies that show that if Africa was to focus on liquid gas for the
Yes.
next 10 years, the emissions that they will emit against the global emissions will not be up to 2%. So how does that juxtaposed with the point you are making, which is quite very, very important, that Africa is actually having an opportunity now from the perspective that the bonds, you call it bonds,
Yeah.
is it carbon bonds that
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
actually attract a lot of revenue to the continent? This
Yes.
is actually going to be working against that if Africa was to move. But then the argument that could be counter to that is if Africa was to depend on gas, it will only amount to about 1 to 2% increase in greenhouse because this is a low emitting fossil fuel. What would you say to clarify this to those who are watching?
Yes, sure. I mean, I agree absolutely that is a continent of 17% of the global population, but only accounts for 4% of emissions. So definitely, it is net positive. It's a net sink, no doubt. And as you rightly put, exploring gas will only add 2%. So one can argue and say that is, it's still very low. But what we are saying is, what are other better alternatives the continent can go for? What are other cost-effective alternatives the continent can go for? And how can it ensure that whatever it does really works for the majority of the people who are deprived and creates opportunities for all? Because, in the long run, energy is not just energy for, ticking check boxes and saying that, you have bridged the gap, you have done this, you have done that. It is actually it's supposed to be a direct input or reflection of the level of development. So energy is a direct input into the development process. So it has to be relevant to the development, channels that the continent needs to take. Yes.
That's
So
a very
yes.
important point, Bob. And thanks for clarifying that. So now I want to take this. I know that you still have aspects in which you were to transition to put the practical steps in which Africa should take. But before we go there, what I want us to do at the moment is that you touch a point that development for who and gas for whom. And
Yes.
you brought up another point which I think is very, very important for us to focus on this. And I'll bring in the geopolitics of the just transition and the geopolitics of energy, so that at least it can solidify the understanding of where Africa is, because the Africa of now, within the context of the just transition, is different from the Africa 2 years ago. And why I'm bringing this up is we have the Ukraine-Russian war that have caused the increase in fuel prices. And some countries now are looking internally on how they can then be able to explore fossil fuels to wrap up energy opportunities for their citizens. And in this case, this is going against the Paris Climate Change Agreement and even the submission of their national determined contributions, where they had actually put actions that were supposed to focus on clean energy. And some countries have even developed feed-in tariffs that actually shows how they were going to tap renewable energy. And some have put barriers, how they were going to move towards a low emission development pathway. But the current war now that have resulted into fuel crisis, into financial crisis, and into these food crises is bringing geopolitics. So we're situating this within the geopolitics of just transition and energy in particular. What would you say is the current state, and how can the continent navigate this without falling into the trap of going down that path? Because you made a very important point. You cannot be able to move down a path that will not be able to solve the problems of the majority of your citizens. And in as much as we have seen clean energy, the reason why the world is suffering the energy crisis is because of externalities. the externalizing energy for your citizens is actually one of the weakest approach to be able to drive transformational development. But look internally, you need to tap on a renewable resource, because the discussion on gas is being discussed as if it is an infinite resource. It is not. It gets finished. But the sun, 24 hours a day, 365 days, can be tapped. Wind can be tapped. So what I want to just get your perspective is the current geopolitics of energy vis-a-vis Africa, and what Africa needs to do to navigate this without being trapped in the process, because the continent is currently being trapped. Now, to not think transformational development through the clean energy lens, but to think that they can be able to leapfrog by focusing on exploring gas because they have it in abundance. Over.
Very true. Yes, thank you very much. So starting from where you just said now, the cost of fossils, basically, which includes gas, has gone up by up to between 30 to 50%. In some countries, up to 50%. So basically, what we are saying is cooking gas has gone up to 50%. And of course, that comes from it's basically part of the extractive sector, part of, the LPGs, part of the refinery process, all this. So they're all part of, the fossil area. But one thing that is clear here is that the argument that is floating around, geopolitically speaking, is that Africa can be a source, a stopgap measure, basically, to offset the energy supply that was coming from other areas that then continent can come in now to bridge. So the argument is more from the continent still selling, raw gas, basically. But what we should ask ourselves is, how many terminals do we have already in the continent, and who will finance these terminals? So the argument is still very, very fluid, and the nitty-gritties have not come out very clearly. That we are being told that yes, the gas can be, Africa can be source of gas to bridge the gap that is now being experienced across the globe. Yes, that's okay. But do we have the terminals right now? Are there clear measures to invest in this, and who will invest in them, and how will whatever is invested be repaid? Because there's a case in a country that we know that entered into a public-private partnership to develop their gas, and what happened is they signed an agreement with a private investor to produce the gas, and they are to buy up 90% of that gas. What is happening right now is that the country is paying for the investor who did the gas. It was a debt, financed through debt. So they are paying up to 250 million every year for gas that is not spent.
250 million US dollars
million every year, yes, being paid for gas that is not being consumed, simply because the gas has no clients. Because the point is, once you produce the gas, you either sell it as is, or you direct it into your to electricity plants or something to be processed to generate value. But what happens if you just produce it? So that's what is happening. So this is a country that invested in gas. They are producing it, yes, but of course it was done through a public-private partnership. So it's investors who put their money in it, and they say that the government has to be paying them for 90% of what is produced, and they are paying up to 250 million every year for gas that is not consumed. And it is projected that by 2023 they'll have paid a cumulative amount of 4.5 billion for that gas not being produced, so not being consumed. So what you are saying is, in the long run, the continent is part of the global community. You don't disagree, but it should have a clear narrative of how to benefit from its own resources. And what we are seeing clearly is that the narrative of gas as currently constituted does not necessarily work for the continent. That's what I'll say.
I mean, you have actually hit the nail on top. The narrative of gas currently as it is does not work for the continent, both from a price perspective, where we have most African countries with debt to GDP at 77%. That then means if you were to build only one liquid petroleum gas plant, you are going to spend 25 billion, whereas that is not even going to help address the energy poverty challenges that your citizens are facing. But whereas if you were to invest that in clean energy sources, wind, geothermal, solar, you are going to create more opportunities for these citizens. I think one of the aspects that I wanted to touch on a bit before we move to the other aspects is that, as we're speaking now, most countries get excited anytime oil and gas is discovered. We know some that are actually going down the pathway of exploring the gas. If you were to advise this government today, what would you say?
I would say one word: cost-benefit analysis. That's where you should start. The second thing is, whom do you want to impact? If you're talking about the citizens who are the majority deprived by energy, then definitely it has been it has been proven through studies that the most cost-effective, the cheapest way to electrify rural areas is going down the solar mini grids. So solar mini grids, and this solar is available. Africa has 60% of the best, global solar resource, yet has only 1% of its own capacity. So that already tells us that the cost benefit goes down the solar route. That's what I'll say.
What if they counter the argument that they are financially distressed at the moment? They have loans to pay, and the quickest source of revenue is to explore their gas. How will you counter that?
Yes, sure. Definitely, that is a possibility, but we also cannot, deny the fact that there are no success stories across Africa surrounding gas. So we cannot say that we can learn from this country that did this and got this. These are very new area. It's not really new, but for the continent, in terms of the way it is being pushed to explore it now, it is new. And what we are seeing, the motivation is coming from bridging gaps elsewhere, not necessarily gaps within the continent. So, this one, it will take the continent down the same path of extractives, where the same argument is pushed across that we don't have revenue, so let's exploit our resources and sell them as commodities. The commodity price is determined universally at the global level, and you don't really get any value out of it. The point is this: before the continent can think of exploring it, let it look at the entire chain and see that they are generating value in terms of processing and adding value to that gas, before, rather than just piping it and exploiting it and exporting it elsewhere, because that will be the same story as we have seen with oil, we have seen it with other minerals, not really generating much and only employing about 3% of the entire continent. So that's what I would say. The entire value chain has to be looked at, and the narrative has to be, how will it really generate value for the majority of the population?
Very important point, and thank you for advancing those points. The entire value chain needs to be looked at. And one of the aspects that you've touched is that there are exporters and importers, and even those who are exporting oil today, during this moment of fuel crisis, energy crisis, they've not actually benefited much, because the statistics show that they've only benefited about 1/10 of the opportunities that this export of oil brings. And what is the reason? Because they're exporting raw material, they're exporting raw oil, and therefore the proceeds to be achieved from this are quite very low. So advancing this argument without looking at the entire value chain of these minerals is actually not adding up. We will take a break at the moment, and when we come back, we will then discuss the practical ways in which Africa needs to approach the just transition, and more so the narrative on this energy across the continent. We'll be right back.
Thank you. Sure.
Innovative Volunteerism Voices is your space to share your ideas on what you are doing on climate change, on the actions you are taking to drive and build climate resilience in communities. Innovative Volunteerism Voices is where young people across the entire African continent who are retooling their skills and turning their talents to skills and using these skills to devise climate action solutions to touch lives of mothers and children in communities, like simply fabricating solar dryers that are helping mothers reduce post-harvest losses, turning agricultural waste to fuel briquettes that are helping mothers move away from depending on charcoal that is choking millions and costing over 700,000 lives in the continent. Or we're talking about agricultural waste turned to biofertilizer that is replacing chemicalized fertilizers. These voices of climate action across the continent are shared here on these Innovative Volunteerism Voices. Stay tuned and join to listen and learn what innovations are happening across the continent, how climate action is being replaced with inspiration rather than despair, where climate action is inspiring youth to not only find their purpose, but to help turn themselves to solution providers. This space, Innovative Volunteerism Voices, is where nothing but knowledge triumphs. Stay tuned.
And we hope you are staying tuned. We are discussing Africa and just transition and the opportunities that can be unleashed from this for the entire continent. And I am discussing this with a special guest, Robert Mungiri, who is breaking it down like no other person can do it. Please, if you have any questions and answers, please drop them and we'll be able to answer them. Yes, my guest, Robert, before we went on this short break, we were discussing about how Africa can actually navigate the space of this just transition and the discussion on natural gas. So if we were to move forward to reshape this narrative, what would be the 5 things we need to look at very practically so that at least we can take this debate to another level and the continent will benefit out of this?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, the first step for me would be to dissect the energy issue into 2. There is the electricity and of course the clean cooking aspect, because all these areas our people are deprived. So electricity, we know that in the continent of Africa has the lowest per capita kilowatt, per capita amount of electricity that is produced per capita. Only 600 kilowatt hours per person, against which is just 10% of the global kilowatt per capita. But what you also know is that the distribution of of this gap is not universal, that some countries have as high as 3,000, others have as low as 13 kilowatt per person, kilowatt hour per person. So that is one. Electricity side is one. The other side is the clean cooking, where up to 900 people don't have clean cooking facilities across
900 million, yes.
900, yeah, up to 900 million don't have. In the electricity, up to 600, up to 580 to 600 don't have access to electricity. So that is the first thing, dissecting it and dividing it into 2. And then going now, the electricity side, what we know is 84% of those who are deprived are in the rural areas. So what does that tell us? First, that is the first thing. The first thing now we see here is that the continent should focus more on investing in decentralized solutions, mostly for its rural population, to bring them up to speed. And what should happen mostly is the focus should be on power that can power both households as well as power processing facilities, cottage industries, for example, in rural Africa. This should be really the target, to ensure that the process of electrification simultaneously unlocks income and enterprise opportunities for the majority. And in so doing, then they'll even be able to be paying and maintaining the electricity supply. Because another issue that can come in here is that where people don't have the purchasing power, the fiscal space to afford the energy, then the utilities also run into losses, because they cannot just be pumping power that is people cannot pay for. So the two have to go together, electrifying houses as well as enough power to power exactly. The second thing now becomes the aspect of how then do we create these enterprise opportunities. The focus sector should be the agro value chain, which is the most accessible. 64% of the population is engaged in that area, and 50% of the continent's 25% of the continent GDP is in that area. So that is an area that is very accessible, and it can be a very rapid sector to really bring the bottom to the middle and the middle to the top. So the second thing then becomes that the energy has to be fashioned that it is dedicated to enterprise in this area, that is the agro value chain. The third thing would be what we discussed, I think, some time back with you. There was aspect of trade of energy across the continent. This is something that really needs to start coming in very strongly. That what we know, the clean energy solutions are not universally available across the entire continent, but each sector or each region, sub-region of the continent is a leader in a particular type of or resource. For example, we know that Southern Africa and the north, the coastal areas, are very good at wind. Eastern and Central Africa is very good at hydro. The geothermal is very, very, very effective within the East Africa region. So what we can have is that the region can continuously invest in integrating their power grids through what they call the power pools, So we can have power pools that are, instead of being regional per se, they are power pools that are based on the resources, the clean resources that are abundant in a particular region. For example, the East African region can focus on power pools that are based on hydro,
right,
and geothermal. The northern and southern can focus on power pools that are focused on wind, and all these trading in between across countries enables countries now to create the mix, a good energy mix that is basically clean energy. And what will happen is they'll have enough baseload power to power the urban areas and the industries, as well as focusing on the rural side to use the solar, which is universally accessible across the entire continent. The fourth thing would be youth, really bringing the youth very strongly as stakeholders in bridging the energy gap. And for them, as I said earlier, I think when you're starting, the best way they can enter is through non-capital intensive areas where we know the clean cooking now comes in. Youth engaged in recovering waste to generate affordable clean power for domestic use. That will be a very good area for them. And I think there's a model that the other day you shared that is coming out of a country that we're working in Cameroon, where we are seeing communities working with youth, each bringing their strengths on board, and through this symbiosis between them, informal sector and the youth, we are seeing for the first time communities having access to clean cooking that is a biogas. And biogas actually is methane, which is very similar to natural gas in terms of its validity on the environment. So the model here is what young people have been trained, they have skills in areas of developing this clean cooking. The informal sector don't have the skills, but they can offer in-kind support, they can offer untrained labor to develop this solution. So the two come together without any money being involved. They bring their resources together, they come up with a biodigester that is used to generate this power, and they do the gas and the biogas, the gas and the biofertilizer, which is a byproduct. They trade in this amongst the community. They continue to generate incomes for themselves. They use this income, they reinvest it back into this model that they've come up with to expand it to other areas. So that is another thing. The youth working in the informal sector to bridge gaps in the lower side of energy, basically the cooking energy, which is of a low capital intensive area. The fifth would be very targeted incentives and mostly of a physical nature. Why physical? Because the one of the areas that we are seeing is a big missed opportunity in Africa is the failure to tap the opportunity to lend to the informal sector. We know, for example, through statistics, that it is estimated that Africa's informal sector has up to 300 billion worth of credit that is not being tapped simply because they're viewed as high capital clients or high risk areas. Sorry, but these are people who have enterprise ideas that only need to be supercharged with capital or with financial capital. So what we need is incentives that are targeted at unlocking this capital that is held up by the informal sector actors in form of their opportunity to be lent to. And how can this happen? This can happen through very targeted cash guarantees, where cooperatives in the rural areas, for example, or cooperatives that engage in the informal sector are de-risked to be able to lend very affordably to enterprises by the informal sector, by our young people that engage in these energy areas. For example, the one that we just talked about now,
right,
which is a initiative of cooperatives. So de-risking such enterprise areas through targeted policy incentives can go a very long way. And then, of course, citizens' actions, of course, in demanding, or not demanding, but providing objectives for legislation to work for them. Through such actions, for example, you can generate data, you can generate lessons, you can generate experiences that you can then use to lobby for more legislation, more policies that are working, that work to expand the successes that have already generated. So I'll stop there for now, but I think you get the gist.
Yes, that is quite very, very elaborate. And the dimension that there are two aspects when we are talking of energy here: lighting and cooking. which in this case is mostly clean cooking. It's a narrative that is not necessarily always discussed in a very juxtaposing way. We hear about electricity and people think mostly lighting, or we hear about clean energy solutions and people think cooking, but they don't know that we need to tackle the two at the same time, and the two being tackled at the same time need to be looked differently. And the aspect of the power pool is very, very important, which is not discussed at the moment. But most importantly is that the continent, as you said, have this Africa Continental Free Trade, which is the biggest in the entire world, that have actually a GDP value over 3 trillion US dollars and a population, a market of 1.4 billion people. Energy should actually become one of the biggest products that need to be traded across the continent based on the comparative advantage of the regions using this power pool. And I think the aspect of adding value that you've mentioned is quite very, very important, because if you look at the post-harvest losses across the continent, 48 billion US dollars because of lack of value addition, only exacerbating the inefficiency in the agro value chain, is costing jobs, is costing food, and at the same time depreciating foreign reserves, because the countries end up importing unemployment and exporting employment, which is costing the continent over 35 billion US dollars. And I think the aspect of the youth, I will zero in here, and the youth are the powerhouse of the continent when it comes to human resource, which is the biggest sovereign capital that the continent have got. All these aspects that you've named, these are opportunities. These are disguised opportunities. So what I want us to discuss is, why is it that these realities are not actually being followed? These opportunities in these realities are not being tapped. The discussion is happening. The ideas are being shared. But it seems there is some deafening of ears towards this, that nobody is listening. Do you think that the youth are not getting it, or what do you really think is happening? Is it an attitude issue? Is it despising logic that is being brought about within the continent that can be able to provide solutions to them? Or in your own understanding, what is happening that they're not tapping this?
Yes, I think in my understanding, there's a lot of contamination amongst young people. Unfortunate to say this, that yes, that lies, are taking center stage, and the realities as they are, being kicked out the window.
I like the way you put it. Lies are taking center stage. I mean, that's true. Please proceed.
Absolutely. And what are these lies we're talking about? The lies are basically that opportunities will be given, to them without, offering value. At the core of any opportunity is value. One has to generate value, to get opportunities, or, to unlock opportunities. And these opportunities are always hidden in the challenges. But this is never really told. I can recall, I can even talk of myself. I mean, I'm not really young, but I believe young at heart. But from the time I was, I've been growing up, there has never been a narrative that is pushed where we are told that, it is up to you as people who are growing up to generate the jobs that you are looking for. We are never told. We are always told that you go to school, you finish school, and get a job, but never told that the question of who will be creating these jobs is never really brought into the fray. But the reality of the matter is what? These jobs are created by the same people that are like us, the same people around us are the ones supposed. So the young people looking for jobs, actually they're the ones supposed to create the jobs that they're looking for. But the narrative is not told like that. It is told that, oh, you are being, you're being disenfranchised, you're supposed to be enjoying, you're supposed to get jobs ready for you, and this. So I think that contamination of the mindset, I think that is a very big, issue that needs to be addressed across the entire continent. That people need to realize that the opportunities that they are looking for, the opportunities that they believe that they deserve, which is okay, that they have to create them themselves. Yes.
That's a very, thank you for those diagnoses. So how do we get out of the woods here? Because this looks like it's a big issue that has already eaten into the depths of society, that any other thing that doesn't focus on ease or on how easy to get it, nobody is willing to listen. What do you think can be done to get out of the woods?
Yes, I think the first thing is, as at an individual level, we have to be governed by values as individuals, first and foremost. Because the thing is this, the content is not, the idea space is not dark. There are a lot of people who are speaking the truth. But the problem is the willingness to listen to this truth and to abide by it is not there. That is the biggest issue. And why is this so? Because the values are not there. Because if somebody was driven by values, they would stick with the truth, no matter how painful it may be.
Maybe what do you mean by values? Somebody listening might not understand what values are.
Very true.
Values to some is enjoyment.
No, enjoyment is not values. Yes, values of being ready to do the right thing, basically. Values of being ready to listen to people who have gone ahead of you, who have seen it and they have shared. People say that Africans don't mentor each other, but that's not true, because there are a lot of real mentors. I can talk of this forum, for example. You are a good example of a mentor for youth in Africa. But the problem is, thank you very much. We are here because, I can even talk of the way you met back in 2010. Many years ago when I was much younger. But the point is this: values to stick and listen. When somebody who has gone ahead of you and is showing it by example is speaking. Those are some of the values that we really need on this continent. Not coming with preconceived, thoughts and ideas, and not being ready to listen, not having an open mind. No, that's what I mean by values. Basically, principally listening to people who have gone ahead of you, people who have shown through example what needs to be done, and following through. Because you can be advised, all can be said, you can be mentored, but the decision to make, 90% of the decision to be made is up to an individual. Right. So that's what I'm saying. Values really to say that regardless of what is going on around, I will stick to this. It may not look popular now, but this is really the case. This is the reality. This is the truth, and I'll stick to it. Other than trying to bet out there that something better may come up, something that is maybe not as really may come up, which will not really happen. So I'd say that is the biggest issue. Young people around, even old people, because this thing,
exactly.
It transcends, need to prioritize focusing on the truth and being true to themselves and be driven by values and not by
this is very great, Bob. I think we will take a break here, and when we come back, I will focus to have a conversation around social media, because what you are saying is, when we grew up guided by values. We were taught values of respect. We were taught values of obedience. We were taught values of loyalty and sincerity. We were taught these values of hard work. But today, of course, we have hardworking people and hardworking young people. Of course, we have some young people who are sincere and who are loyal to guidance, but the bulk of them are not loyal to guidance. And what you said is, when instruction is not taken, there is the likelihood that what is supposed to be done will not be done. Because the person giving instruction or the people giving instruction, they give out of their experience, they pass through and made some mistakes, but they're correcting you not to make a mistake. But you despise it and you go and make a mistake which could have been avoided. And I think this is a very big issue, which then falls to the point that most of the time, the attitude of wanting without actually assessing what needs to be done to get what they want seems to overshadow. And this is sometimes, to what I have tried to observe, and also from anecdotal evidence driven by social media bubble. So when we come back, we take this break and come back, we'll discuss the effect of social media in the attitude of young people and how this is affecting the narrative of reality within the continent and how we are losing opportunity within the climate action space. We will be right back. But this time around, it will be a dance. Yes, and we are back after that song. And Bob, you saw the song. And, yes, I wanted to have that break. I mean, with that interlude of the song, because I want to transition to something that have something to do with that. It's part of culture. And that song is sung when you hear the word Buka, it's a Nigerian song. It's talking about, so you have worked so hard, so you need to eat, and that's why you see the shoulders coming up. It's time to so that is to buka, it's time to eat. And what I want to do now is to transition to this attitude. Social media is an opportunity in disguise. It can make or break, but it looks like it's breaking more. Do you think social media is contributing to the attitude of wanting without necessarily needing to do what is needed to be done to get what they want? What's your take on this?
I'll actually refer. I'll cite the guest that you had. I think some days ago. I think last weekend. You had Emmanuel Isika and Abola, I think. Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Bolaji. And Bolaji. They nailed it on the head when they said that on social media, people share the product and not the process. You know. So what happens is everybody's attracted by the product, but nobody really understands the process that is behind generating such a product. So that is part of the contamination that I was talking about. Social media actually, unfortunately, has, it's an open space, which is okay, but it requires a lot of discernment at an individual level. A lot of people have, had their mindsets focused on the wrong thing simply because what they saw on social media is what they believe to be the case, and they take it, as reality, which is not the case. The truth of the matter is they can never be a product without a process, and the process in most of the cases is never linear. It takes a lot of ups and downs, a lot of perseverance, a lot of patience, a lot of hard work, to achieve a product. So I'd say this: social media should never be a source of somebody's vision, or a source of somebody's, what I say, somebody's unborrowed vision, what you call a borrowed vision. No, social media basically should be a place where you go when you have a clear vision in mind that I want to achieve this, I want to get there, and then go there very targetedly to get specific knowledge, specific information of how what you are trying to achieve can be fueled. What new ideas can be brought in to complement what you already know. So it should be a place of gathering knowledge, not a place of gathering of entertainment per se. Really, that is where we are missing it. I'd say the young people are really missing it, that
exactly,
because a lot of lies are shared on social media. Yes,
exactly. And from what you are saying, social media is actually a place to create networks that can help advance one's vision, that can help you grow.
absolutely.
It's supposed to be a place where you connect with one another, because that's actually the intent. It's supposed to be a place where you market your product, and that product is achieved through a process where you have to be dedicated, determined, and at the same time endure some short-term pain for long-term gain. But it seems like it's become a bubble whereby young people are just focusing on the product, and because anybody can throw anything there and tell lies, then that will be embraced. And then the attitude and the mindset that things can happen tomorrow, even if you haven't worked, seems to be perpetuated there. And that's quite very, very dangerous. Now, we're at the top of the hour, and I will hand over to you, because in the mindset spot, we discuss ideas, and you will throw any question that you have, so that at least I can be able to also provide my perspective. Over to you, Bob.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. It's an honor to once again, of course, be in this discussion with you, a continental icon, and yeah, we say God bless you, of course, every time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you, sir. Yes. So, of course, my first question will be, you are mentoring youth. I mean, you are what I'll consider a model mentor of young people in Africa, and you mentor them through both, face to face, as well as through through your what you share on social media. Very active on social media, sharing things that are very encouraging, very uplifting, very informative. You see. So I'd ask this question to you. Progress is always slow. How do you make sure that you remain as energetic and as positive as you are, regardless of the response? Because I mean, let's face it. I look at your YouTube. a repository of knowledge, your YouTube channel, a repository of knowledge. I usually say that I don't know when, but a day will come when people have hit the wall. They just have to run to that YouTube and look at the videos that you share. I mean, knowledge, experiences, very practical aspects that can fit every aspect of life. But you look at a video, maybe 5 views, 10 views, few views, no comments. Are people really seeing these things? So I'll ask you this: how do you maintain that energy and that positivity regardless of the subpar response from your target audience?
You make a very good journalist, Bob. You know how to do questions, and honestly speaking, I think that's a very important question. Yes, it's a very important question and asked at the right time, because if you look, it fits back to your answers to the narrative question. If you notice very clearly, there has been a misconstrued narrative, a false narrative that has been driven for quite a very long time, that has somehow cajoled people to start to believe what is not right, and what is right is somehow despised. To believe that, like you said, that things need to be done for people, not people doing things to get what they want. The attitude that if I don't have it, I need to complain, rather than using the little I have to get what I want. And in the course of that, I ask for gaps to be filled because that's what I have gotten from my experience. This false narrative then has been ingrained and has become the foundation for quite a very long time, that has made people to give up rather than stay there, learn, and use those lessons to make progress. Because of these laxity in the narrative and the misconstruing of reality, with very few people standing up to say, look, we are going in the wrong direction. It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be hard if you actually want to make impact, if you want to create products and services, if you want to make discoveries, you want to generate new knowledge. Because of the absence of this, then abnormality has been normalized. And because of that normalization of abnormality, it's then resulted to the attitude you see today. And because of that, I understand from what I have seen that if we are then to give up, then we will be at the same level of what is happening. It therefore means you must stand at. And by standing at means you need to stay the course. You need to become quite versatile, because the versatility and the resilience is what could also become the benchmark for others to say, look, I will not give up. I will then stay the course and learn. And as a result of that, you will start to have a critical mass of people who can then become the best offshoots or examples and early adopters of reality of solutions to do things so that others can follow. And don't forget this, we live in a continent where people flock to product, not process. And if you persevere and actually do that which is right to come out with a product, you're going to have many people. There is this saying, which I agree with, that there are very few builders and many joiners. There are few builders who will build a product. But when it comes to the joining part, and this joining part is actually where the eating is, you will meet so many people. So to answer your question in a very simplistic way, is that the wrong narrative that has been perfected and cemented for quite a very long time is one in which we need to debug. And by debugging that, you need to stay the course, you need to be resilient, and you need to develop what I call the thick skin to then be able to know that people will give up, people will not believe it because they have already taken abnormality to be the norm. But along the way, many youth are already picking up the logic. It takes time to get them on board, and we hope that they will stay on board as they start to see value in turning challenges into opportunities, leveraging on climate action, that they will start to also see that the jobs they are looking for are not going to come from government. The jobs they are looking for will come through the actions they take. That the realities of society are such that we, the citizens, have to solve. And by solving them, we need to retool our skills. And that needs effort, that needs dedication, and that needs passion. And that the passion within them is actually an opportunity for them to unleash, because they can turn it to profits. And that it benefits them more rather than someone else if they listen and follow guidance. So this is what gives me hope. What gives me hope and keeps me awake is the fact that some will listen and will become the critical mass to actually bring others on board, because when people start to see value in what they do, they will stick to it no matter how long it will take. Until then, that's the pathway, and that's what keeps me excited and always motivated to move forward.
Wow, excellent. Excellent. Yeah, being the standard, and of course over time a critical mass will be generated, and
Absolutely.
then
That's
yes,
the hope.
that process will continue. Excellent. I mean, that we keep hope alive. Yeah, you mentioned government. I mean, in my discussions with people around, and even what we see on TV, a lot of blame is placed on government. A lot of responsibility is placed on government, and there's no clear cut division of labor here, or division of responsibilities, where the citizens come in, where the government comes in. A citizen will believe that when they queue to vote for somebody, to get into office, that this person then is supposed to be the one solving the problems. This is a universal belief. I even remember when we were in school, we were being told that, at times your suffering is because of so and so and so. Let me not go far, but I think you get the gist. Basically, we're told that our problems begin and end with government. The people who are in government, they're doing this, they're doing that. I'll ask you this. What responsibility do we have as citizens, and what responsibility does government have? What is the divide between these two groups?
Very timely question again. And as I said, you make a very excellent journalist, because look at the reality. It goes back to the narrative. So you will notice that most of the ills we face in the continent today is as a result of a wrong narrative that has been perfected over time. The truth is this: the role of government is to create an enabling environment for enterprises to strive. And who drive these enterprises? Citizens. Government is not a repository for solutions alone. Citizens are. And those in government are citizens. So they come from the very community in which these citizens are nurtured. It therefore means the demarcation between citizens and government is supposed to create the enabling environment, put incentives in place so that if you are to start a business, you will pay less taxes. The process will be straightforward without any red tape or bureaucracies. The government provides security so that if people set up their businesses, they're not going to be destroyed or looted. Government put in place policies that can then be able to ensure that when a mother who grows a vegetable, she can then be able to take a loan at a very low interest rate or zero interest rate, so that at least she can then be able to get the inputs that can make her business flourish. These are the rules of government: protecting the citizen, creating the enabling environment for enterprises to flourish, and at the same time, setting the tone and inspiring the nation so that at least citizens can know that they are the biggest resource. When these are done, the buck is with the citizens, because actually it is the citizens who are supposed to do what is needed. When I say what is needed, the opportunities that are around us are opportunities that needs to be tapped by citizens. And in the course of tapping those opportunities, there are going to be gaps. They then need to ask government to fill those gaps through incentives. Because the reality is this: I've said government is not a repository of solutions anywhere in the world. If you look at innovations, they came from the private sector, from private citizens. Whether we're talking Apple here, we're talking Google here, we're talking Samsung phones, they were not developed by government. But what happened was that government laid the enabling environment for these private individuals or private enterprises to strive. And by striving, they use the ingenuity of ordinary citizens, the knowledge, the technology, the innovation from ordinary citizens, benefiting from an enabling environment to be able to advance their transformational in entrepreneurial spirit. So to answer your question, the citizens have been made sometimes to act when they have not even started doing. And because of that, then it becomes more a kind of a societal norm that we need to ask government to do as we fold our arms and wait. Of course, there are a lot of people who are doing what they can do, but they're doing what they can do, and sometimes they miss to ask for the gaps. Let's take, for example, a mother who is growing her vegetables. They get spoiled because she doesn't have a simple climate action solution of solar dryer to dry. If a youth comes up with a logic of developing a solar dryer, and that mother in a village now uses it to dry her vegetables, the gap could be that that mother cannot afford to buy that solar dryer. It therefore means that the mother can then be able to make the case, look, we need tax incentives, we need credit, accessible credit, so that at least we can be able to take it and pay after 5 months to assess inputs that can help us dry our vegetables and sell to make money. That means that government needs to put incentives, de-risking tools in place, leveraging on communal cooperatives so that those mothers in that community can access that money because that is the accessible financial institution to them. The same with the youth. If they learn to turn agricultural waste into fuel briquettes, and the difficulty in the process is that they cannot afford the machines. The same case, the gap is we need finance. But you cannot say you need finance when you have never even learned any skill. You have not tested anything anywhere. You have not even identified a gap through practical experience and think that things should not be done. So the role of the citizen is to do what they can do using what they have, not what they hope to have. And that is where innovative volunteerism comes in, that you leverage what you have. You try to learn a skill using your ability to do so. And in the course of learning that skill, you use every effort you have to then turn that skill into a product by doing something, by turning agricultural waste to fuel briquettes, by trying to develop a solar dryer, by trying to turn agricultural waste into biofertilizer. Of course, you identify gaps in terms of what you need as an input, a machine, or gaps in terms of accessibility to finance. And then you make the case that this is what we lack. Every right, reasonable person will listen to you. Then on the government side, you must then be able to ensure that at least you leverage the instruments, policy instruments to incentivize citizens and capitalize on those who are doing well so that they can become the critical mass to inspire others by setting up, retooling institutions, turning technical schools to institutions in which those who are doing what they can do can be connected to come and teach people using practical experience there. And continuously inspire those who are already doing it so that you're not starting from scratch, but building already on existing practical enterprises that can then become the levers to bring those from the bottom and actually push them forward. And lastly, what is very, very important here is that if you look across the entire continent in every country, the aspect of money can never be ignored. A lot of young people and the informal sector, we do not have money to do A, B, C, D. And that's the truth. They do not have money to do A, B, C, D. The truth is there will never be enough money to do A, B, C, D. But the little can be leveraged in a very tactical, practical way to do much more. And what does this mean? The easiest way for financing development in the continent is to leverage government resources and leverage the tool, which we already mentioned before, a de-risking tool, which is quite very simple. If government takes $1 billion US dollars and develop de-risking tools that will engage microfinancing institutions and cooperatives where the bulk of the informal sector is, and then engage these cooperatives so that at least they can give them this money through a partnership that is to develop these risk-sharing facilities so that they can lend at zero interest rate to those who are already working on enterprise or those who have a very clear plan that they can develop something and showcase that they have done something even without having money, because that de-risk that person, and that money goes through such structured approaches and traceability institutions like cooperative. Government transformational agenda on every aspect will happen in less than 5 years. But these things are not done. And we hope that those who are listening can actually be able to pick these ideas, and we're here to guide. And that is the way to drive transformational development. Because enterprising Africa will not happen through hand to mouth. It will happen through every citizen doing what he or she loves, leveraging on their passion, but supported to close gaps in the process. And that way, you will lift people from the bottom of the pyramid, and that becomes the ladder that can transition informal sector to the formal sector. And that will be an opportunity for countries because they will pay taxes and the country will blossom in revenue and revenue.
Wow. 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 I'm telling you, this thing, I mean, this is really, it's like a model, really, a model for the continent, no doubt.
Indeed, it is.
People doing what they can do, identifying their gaps, and their gaps being bridged through policy, but in a very objective way, through legislation, in a very objective way. And then that now becomes the ladder. Brilliant, brilliant. But the last question, the last one, there's issue of, education that we wonder, I've heard this argument being said that, Africa's education and being demonized, across the continent and maybe across the globe. Yet I know somebody like you're a product of Africa. Really. You go to hospitals across many countries across Africa. I mean, every country across Africa. You go to the continent, and at an hospital, the doctor you get there is an African. I mean, guarantee. So across, we see Africans, performing well across different professions, different disciplines, and doing well. But the question is, why isn't this sort of technical knowledge, technical know-how that definitely Africans have to perform those jobs that they're doing? Why is it was it transforming, transitioning, or was it becoming a source of development? Why aren't we seeing development happening? Because if you ask me, I think we already have a lot of professors across Africa. There are many professors. There are many, disciplines, people of different disciplines across Africa. But does that mean that these people are not a critical mass that can drive progress across the continent? What is the missing link here? People are educated, but that education is not being transformed into real development on the ground. What are we missing? What are we missing? That's the question. That's the last one.
I love that.
Yes.
What are we missing? It goes back to that word again, narrative.
Mm-hmm.
There is a false narrative that Africa does not have what it needs to be able to transform. That's a lie. And then those who are supposed to be at the forefront leading that, based on their experiences on what they've done elsewhere and back in the continent, are missing. And so there is a void. And what is being fed is nothing works, which is not true. I mean, the reality is that things work. But the question is, are they working as fast as they should be? No, they're not. Why? Like you rightly said, the indigenous development model has been missed. And sometimes even what works well gets lost, and what doesn't work then gets projected. And instead, those, as you've mentioned, the professors, the medical doctors, who are in their own right doing excellent work wherever they are not using that excellent work to showcase to the population that this is the way it's supposed to be done and this is how we are doing it, and that you can do it even better than us because we are in an information age where you can even go to Google and be able to learn more, where you can connect with people in the north, south, and west of the world and learn more. But the attitude has been that it is not good enough. And once you make up your mind to think that something is not good enough, rather than it is good, we can perfect it. Because perfection is what each and everyone should be able to aim for. We must become perfect in whatever we do. And how do you become perfect? By continuously learning, by continuously learning, by continuously learning, by continuously learning. But it's been made as if we studied in this continent. I got my first degree in this continent. That then means that despite the fact that the educational system might not be optimal, at least it is still working. But what has been missing is that it needs to change with times. So the educational system within the continent today cannot still be addressing the issues of the 1980s or the 60s or the 70s. We are in 2022. It therefore means the educational curriculum should change. We should not be having 620 million citizens in a continent that have abundance energy resource. Can we then have a course where everybody studies energy solutions, regardless of whether you are an art or a science student? We have a continent where we have 257 million people going to bed hungry. Food insecurity is ravaging the continent. Can we then be able to ensure that food systems can actually become part and parcel of a subject for everybody to study from a solutions and entrepreneurial perspective? It therefore means entrepreneurship should become a course for every citizen across the continent. And if you cannot validate that, you should not be able to get a degree. That's what is needed. And once this becomes the norm and not the exception, then the continent now will start to nurture citizens that are fit for purpose. When I say fit for purpose from a solutions perspective, that when it comes to health, the way issues need to be addressed in Africa from a health perspective cannot just be linear, because there are so many factors that come into effect. For example, healthy, nutritious food that is cultivated using nature-based solutions, ecosystem-based adaptation within the continent is not even being preached as the first defense mechanism for citizens not even to fall sick, that if you eat nutritious food, it boosts your immune system. These are practical, proven scientific research and empirical work that has been done. That is health. That when it comes to clean energy solutions, the solutions doesn't even need to be complicated. That young youth coming out of school can be able to develop this and decentralize to communities and make money. And that there are already incentives that government are putting in place, but the citizens are not seizing it because they have not even been told in schools. You will talk of renewable energy, somebody will say, wait a bit, what is that? But if there was an entrepreneurship course that focuses on Africa's comparative catalytic sectors, agriculture, clean energy, sustainable transport, shape it in a way that actually it's understood by everybody from an entrepreneurial perspective, then we will then now have a continent where people know where opportunities can be tapped, and then the continent challenges will be solved. So to answer your question in a nutshell, the narrative aspect, the false narrative that nothing works, the false narrative that we are not good enough. Like Albert Einstein said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, the fish will live all its life thinking it is stupid. We've been benchmarking ourselves with things that are stereotypes, but not with reality. And that even what works when we do it, we are afraid to tell it because we know that it is not going to be accepted. Look, there's absolutely nowhere on earth where people's stories are told by others. You must tell your story. If
100%.
you not tell your story, others will tell it the way they like. But I have never understood, and now let me bring in this dimension. We are now, as a global community, suffering the fuel crisis, food crisis, and financial crisis. But in the continent of Africa today, especially when it comes to the food crisis, where the young people who are tech savvy and who are more vibrant and energetic and innovative in everything they do, I have not seen any, and I stand corrected. If anybody has the evidence, you should be able to send. I've not seen the young people taking the center stage to say, look, we have cassava, which is a climate resilient crop. These are what needs to be done. These are the things that need to be done, and these are the incentives we need from government so that we can tap into this. This is a continent with over 60% of its population, of her population, youthful. So where will the solutions come from? When we do not grab and explore what we have in abundance and tell the story and explain how it needs to be done and get to it to do it, who should do it? So that is where the continent misses it. And it goes back just to narrative, a narrative of problems as to the narrative of solutions, a narrative of problems for problems as to a narrative of solutions to problems. This is where we are. And I believe that these discussions are going to awaken Africans and especially friends of Africa to also see that at least opportunities can come, but the citizenry needs to be inspired and inspired with the right narratives, a narrative of solutions to problems, a narrative of challenges being disguised opportunities, a narrative of explaining what works rather than hiding it and only projecting problems and making liability become an asset. There is nowhere where a liability can become an asset. Over.
Wow. Hey, I mean, I'd summarize it into three: narrative, context, and continuous improvement, continuous learning. I mean, brilliant. Wow. Yeah. So those are my three questions for you, and I think,
yes,
you can
thank you
take
very
it
much
from
for
there.
bringing up those three questions. I think for those of you who are joining in, we are discussing Africa's climate action and just energy transition and the soft aspects that needs to be put in place to be able to ensure that citizenry picks up these opportunities and drive renewable energy solutions within the context of Africa and ensure that at least we can have transformational food systems that uses energy to add value so that at least the inefficiency in the agro value chain can actually be reduced and reversed with the 400 to the 48 billion US dollars that is currently being lost. That energy is not just about lighting. Energy should also be about adding value. And that we cannot just talk energy from lighting, but we also need to talk it from clean cooking. But we need to move away from focusing on fossil fuels, but to now focus on clean, renewable energy resources, which should become the peace plan for the continent. And this conversation, we'll be having this with Robert Mugibi, who has digested and provided his perspective in a way only him can do it, in a way that at least inspires, but at the same time being practical to the realities of the continent. Bob, we will now have to run up, but I would like your last word. What would be your last word to those who are watching us?
I didn't understand that.
Thank you very much, sir. Yes, yeah, my last word will be that the buck stops with you. That will be my last word for each and every one of us. I'm speaking that to myself and to our fellow comrades across the continent, that, the buck stops with us. Africa's transformation, the Africa's opportunities, they are there for us to take. But taking them, not a matter of taking them for taking them per se, but taking them with humility and from the dimension that we want to touch many lives with, with solutions that are there for our taking. So the buck stops with us, and let us move. Let us be patient in the process, and let us, proceed with, with boldness and taking advantage of every opportunity that we can to learn and to to turn challenges into opportunities. Yes, so that will be my last word. Buck stops with us. Thank you.
The buck stops with us. You've heard that. The buck stops with us. And it takes self-belief to be able to endure. Because the reality is that emergencies, as you see, drought, floods, and now wildfires and heat waves across the entire world, are examples that climate change is already with us. And for those of us who still deny that climate change is not with us, then you are definitely living in another planet, not this planet Earth. The droughts in the Horn of Africa, with over 600 million livestock lost and human life that has been lost that cannot even be quantified in any monetary terms, to the cyclones and hurricanes that are plaguing millions. What this means is we must then be able to start to look at how do we build resilience of communities so that at least they can avert these calamities and emergencies when they arrive. The only way to do this is to talk about one word, socioeconomics, making sure that people put more money in their pockets and food on the table. Because when that drought strikes and a mother doesn't have food on the table and no money in the pocket to afford alternatives, she is going to suffer more. When there is a cyclone or a hurricane that displaces people as a result of flooding and water coming into their homes in troves, they will not be able to go anywhere, even if there was early warning that things were going to get worse. When there is COVID-19 as an emergency that happened, and supply chains were disrupted, and a mother doesn't have an alternative, a diversified opportunity to put food on the table, then she and her family will starve not only one night, but nights and many more. These realities dawning on us today means we need to contextualize solutions. We need to discuss and frame a narrative that inspires, not one that dissuades. And of course, leverage on our sovereign capital, our young, vibrant, energetic, passionate young people, and inspire them to turn their passions into profits. That is the essence of innovative volunteerism. And on this mindset spot today, we discuss these issues. We will continue to discuss these issues because narratives shape perspectives. And that's what we need to deliver and drive the sustainable development goals in a way that no one is left behind. Thank you very much for watching. Until then, see you next time. Bye-bye.
See you. Thank you.